A 10-year-old girl collapsed in the snow on Christmas Eve, clutching a torn photograph of a mother she'd never see again, when through frozen tears she saw it. A Victorian cottage glowing impossibly warm in the abandoned town, its door unlocked, its secrets waiting, and inside that attic, a discovery worth $300 million that would change everything. Before we dive into the story, make sure to smash subscribe, because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The snow fell thick and silent over the town of Frosthaven, Vermont, a place so forgotten that even the highway signs had stopped mentioning it years ago. It was Christmas Eve, 1998, and the temperature had dropped to 12 degrees below zero, the kind of cold that turned breath into ice crystals and made every step feel like walking through broken glass. Through the abandoned main street, past boarded-up shops and homes with caved-in roofs, a small figure stumbled forward. Her name was Nora Bennett, and she was 10 years old, though she looked younger. Hunger and fear had a way of stealing childhood before its time. Her coat was too thin, donated from a church bin 3 towns back. Her boots had holes that let in snow with every step. Her fingers, red and stiff, clutched a single photograph, creased, water-stained, barely holding together. It showed a woman with kind eyes and dark hair smiling at the camera. On the back, in faded pencil, someone had written, "Mama, 1989. Nora had never met her. Her mother had died in childbirth, and Nora had been passed from foster home to foster home like an unwanted package, each placement shorter than the last. The most recent family, the Carters, had driven her out to this dead town 3 days ago, told her to wait in the car while they went into an old building. She'd waited for hours. They never came back. She'd found a note on the dashboard that morning, tucked under the keys they'd left behind. "We can't do this anymore. You'll be better off. There's a town 5 miles south. Walk there. Tell them you got lost." No apology, no goodbye, just abandonment wrapped in cowardice. Nora had tried to start the car, but she didn't know how. She'd sat there as the sun set and the cold crept in like a living thing. When hypothermia started pulling her under, she'd forced herself out, forced herself to move, but she hadn't walked south toward help. Something deeper, something she couldn't name, had pulled her north into the skeleton town of Frosthaven. Maybe she wanted to disappear. Maybe she was tired of being saved only to be abandoned again. Or maybe she just didn't know where else to go. Now, as the snow fell harder and the wind howled through empty streets, Nora's legs buckled. She fell to her knees in the middle of what had once been the town square. A frozen fountain stood in the center, its stone angels covered in ice. She looked up at the sky, at the endless white, and felt the fight drain out of her. This was it. This was how it ended. A 10-year-old girl, alone, frozen, forgotten. She closed her eyes. But then, through the howling wind, she saw something. A light. Warm, golden, impossibly bright against the storm. Her eyes snapped open. Across the square, barely visible through the swirling snow, stood a house. No, not just a house. A cottage. Victorian, 3 stories tall, with gabled windows and ornate trim, and every window glowed with soft amber light. Nora blinked hard, certain she was hallucinating. No one lived in Frosthaven. The town had been evacuated in 1976 when the lumber mill closed and the economy collapsed. Everyone had left. The buildings had been rotting for over 20 years. But the light didn't flicker or fade. It stayed steady, warm, real. She forced herself to stand. Her legs screamed in protest, but she moved forward 1 step, then another. The snow tried to pull her down, but she kept her eyes locked on that light. It took forever to cross the square. Every few feet she had to stop, catch her breath, remind herself to keep moving. But finally, impossibly, she reached the cottage. Up close, it was even more beautiful than she'd imagined. The siding was painted deep forest green with cream-colored trim. The porch wrapped around the front, its railings carved with intricate patterns. A wreath hung on the door, fresh pine branches woven with red ribbon. It looked like something out of a storybook, like it had been plucked from another time and dropped here, untouched by the decay around it. Nora climbed the porch steps, each one creaking under her weight. She reached for the doorknob, expecting it to be locked, expecting this to be another cruel joke. But when she turned it, the door opened. Warmth rushed out like an embrace. Nora stumbled inside and collapsed onto the hardwood floor. For a long moment, she just lay there, feeling the heat seep into her frozen skin. Slowly, carefully, she sat up and looked around. The interior was just as stunning as the outside. The foyer opened into a living room with high ceilings and exposed wooden beams. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and inside it, a fire crackled softly. Not embers, not dying coals, a full, roaring fire, as if someone had just stoked it. But there was no one here. Nora pulled off her wet boots and stood on shaking legs. The floor was polished oak, covered with thick rugs that muffled her steps. She moved deeper into the house, her heart pounding. To her right, a staircase curved upward, its banister carved from dark wood. To her left, a hallway stretched toward what looked like a kitchen. Everywhere she looked, Christmas decorations filled the space. Garland draped across the mantel. A tree stood in the corner, fully decorated with glass ornaments and strings of popcorn. Stockings hung from the fireplace, each one embroidered with a name she didn't recognize. It was like stepping into a photograph from decades ago. Everything was perfect, preserved, waiting. Nora's breath caught when she noticed the small details. A pair of reading glasses sat on the side table next to an open book. A knitting project lay half-finished on the couch, needles still in place. A cup of tea rested on the coffee table, though when Nora touched it, it was ice cold. Someone had lived here once. Someone who had left in the middle of their life and never come back. She walked to the kitchen, drawn by a strange sense of curiosity. The counters were clean, the cabinets neatly closed. When she opened the refrigerator, she gasped. It was full. Milk, eggs, butter, cheese, fresh vegetables, all of it perfectly preserved, as if someone had just gone shopping. But that was impossible. Nora checked the expiration dates. Some were marked 2003, others 2005, years in the future. She slammed the fridge shut, her pulse racing. None of this made sense. The house was warm, the fire was burning, the food was fresh. But Frost Haven had been abandoned for over 20 years. There was no electricity, no gas, no way any of this should work, unless someone was maintaining it, unless someone was here. Nora spun around, suddenly terrified. "Hello?" she called out, her voice small and cracked. No answer. She moved back to the living room, searching for signs of life. That's when she saw it. On the mantel, tucked between two candlesticks, was a framed photograph. She walked closer, her breath fogging in the warm air. The photo showed a woman, maybe 60 years old, with silver hair pulled into a bun and a smile that reached her eyes. She stood in front of this very cottage, one hand resting on the porch railing. Behind her, the town of Frost Haven looked alive. Shops open, people walking, children playing. The photo was dated December 1975. Beside the frame, a small brass plaque read, "Eleanor Whitmore, beloved teacher and keeper of hope." Nora stared at the woman's face, feeling an odd pull in her chest. There was something kind about her, something safe. She picked up the frame, studying it closely, and noticed something tucked behind it. A letter. The envelope was yellowed with age, sealed with red wax. On the front, in elegant cursive, it read, "To whoever finds this home." Nora's hands trembled as she broke the seal and pulled out the letter. The handwriting was the same as the envelope, careful and precise. "My dear finder, if you are reading this, then you have found your way to my home in your darkest hour. I do not know who you are or when you will arrive, but I know this: you are meant to be here. This cottage has been my sanctuary, my joy, and my greatest secret. I have lived here for 43 years, teaching children, tending my garden, and collecting things of great value, not for wealth, but for purpose. I have no family left to inherit what I've gathered, no children to carry on my name. But I believe that the right person, the one who needs it most, will find this place when the time is right. If that person is you, then welcome. The fire will warm you. The food will sustain you. And when you are ready, go to the attic. In the northeast corner, beneath the floorboards marked with a star, you will find a chest. What lies inside is yours, but only if you promise to use it wisely, to help others as I have tried to do, and to never let greed steal your heart. Do not be afraid. You are safe here. You are home. With love and hope, Eleanor Whitmore. Nora read the letter 3 times, each word sinking deeper into her chest. Tears blurred her vision, hot and sudden. She pressed the paper to her chest and sank onto the couch. Someone had left this for her. Not specifically for her, but for someone like her. Someone lost, alone, desperate. Someone who needed hope more than air. She looked around the room with new eyes. The fire, the decorations, the warmth. It wasn't magic. It was love. Love left behind by a woman who believed that kindness could reach across time. Nora sat there for a long time, letting the warmth soak into her bones. She ate food from the kitchen, bread, cheese, an apple that tasted impossibly fresh. She drank water from the tap, which ran clear and cold, and when exhaustion finally pulled her under, she curled up on the couch beneath a thick quilt and fell into the deepest sleep she'd had in years. When she woke, pale morning light streamed through the windows. The storm had passed. Outside, the world was blanketed in fresh snow, silent and still. Nora sat up slowly, half expecting the house to be gone, for this to have been a dream. But it was real. All of it. She folded the quilt carefully and stood. Her body still ached, but the sharp edge of cold was gone. She felt stronger, alive. Her eyes drifted to the staircase, the attic. Eleanor's letter had mentioned the attic. Nora climbed the stairs slowly, her hand trailing along the banister. The second floor had 3 bedrooms, each one neat and undisturbed. At the end of the hall, a narrow door stood slightly ajar. She pushed it open to reveal another staircase, steeper and darker, leading up. She climbed carefully, the wood creaking under her weight. At the top, the attic opened into a wide, sloped space filled with boxes, old furniture, and trunks covered in dust. Weak sunlight filtered through a small round window, casting everything in soft grey light. Nora moved through the space slowly, searching. And then she saw it. In the northeast corner, just as the letter had said, a section of floorboards bore a carved star. Her heart pounded as she knelt down. The boards were loose. She pried them up carefully, her fingers trembling. Beneath the floor, hidden in the shadows, sat a chest. It was old, made of dark wood reinforced with iron bands. The lock was ornate, shaped like a rose. Nora stared at it, barely breathing. This was it. Whatever Eleanor Whitmore had left behind, it was inside this chest. She reached down and tried to lift it. Heavy, impossibly heavy. She pulled harder, dragging it across the floor until it sat in the light. The lock glinted, mocking her. She needed a key. Nora looked around the attic frantically, searching through boxes and drawers. Nothing. She ran back downstairs, tearing through the kitchen, the living room, the bedrooms. Still nothing. Frustrated, she sank onto the couch, staring at the Christmas tree in defeat. And that's when she noticed it. One ornament, hanging near the bottom, was different from the others. It wasn't glass or wood. It was metal, shaped like a tiny rose. The same design as the lock. Nora's hands shook as she reached for it. The ornament came off easily, and when she turned it over, she saw the small loop at the top wasn't just for hanging. It twisted. She twisted it carefully, and the ornament split in half. Inside, nestled in velvet, was a key. Nora laughed, a short, breathless sound. She ran back upstairs, the key clutched tight in her fist. In the attic, she knelt in front of the chest. Her hands trembled so badly she almost dropped the key, but she steadied herself, slid it into the lock, and turned. Click. The lock opened with a soft, satisfying sound. Nora lifted the lid slowly, and what she saw made her heart stop. The chest was filled to the brim. Stacks of cash bound with rubber bands, jewelry, diamonds, pearls, gold chains glittering in the dim light, old coins in protective cases, bonds and stock certificates, yellowed but intact. And at the very top, another letter. Nora picked it up with shaking hands and read, "If you have opened this chest, then you are braver than you know. What you see here is the result of a lifetime of careful saving, wise investments, and a little bit of luck. I never spent it because I never needed it. I had everything I wanted, this home, my students, my books, my peace. But you, dear finder, you need it now. This fortune is valued at approximately $300 million, though I suspect it may be more by the time you find it. It is yours, all of it. But please, I beg you, do not let it change who you are. Use it to build a life, yes, but also to build a world where others like you are not left to freeze in the snow. Be kind, be wise, be the hope I always believed you would be. With all my love, Eleanor." Nora's hands shook so violently, the letter fell from her fingers. $300 million. She stared at the chest, at the money and jewels and documents, and felt the world tilt. She was 10 years old, abandoned, alone. And now she was sitting in an attic with a fortune that could change everything. For a long moment, she couldn't move, couldn't think, couldn't breathe. Then, from somewhere deep inside, a laugh bubbled up. Not hysteria, not disbelief, relief. Pure, overwhelming relief. She wasn't going to freeze. She wasn't going to starve. She wasn't going to be forgotten anymore. Eleanor Whitmore, a woman she'd never met, had saved her life. But even as joy flooded through her, a shadow of fear crept in. No one would believe her. A 10-year-old girl with no family, no home, no proof of who she was, claiming to have found $300 million. They'd take it from her. They'd call her a liar, a thief. They'd put her back in the system, and the money would disappear into the hands of people who didn't need it, didn't deserve it. Nora closed the chest carefully and locked it again. She slid the key into her pocket and covered the chest with an old blanket. Then she sat down on the dusty floor, her back against the wall, and thought. She needed a plan. She needed help. But who could she trust? The answer came slowly, like a whisper in the back of her mind. No one. Not yet. She had to be smart. She had to protect this secret until she could figure out how to make it real, how to make it hers. Nora stood and walked back downstairs. She stoked the fire, made herself another meal, and sat at the kitchen table with Eleanor's letters spread out in front of her. She read them over and over, memorizing every word. Outside, the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the snow. And somewhere in the distance, the sound of an engine broke the silence. Nora froze, her heart hammering. Someone was coming. She ran to the window and peeked through the curtains. A black truck was rolling slowly down the main street, its headlights cutting through the dusk. It stopped in front of the cottage. Nora's breath caught. The driver's side door opened and a man stepped out. He was tall, maybe 50, with a weathered face and a heavy coat. He stood in the snow, staring up at the cottage, his expression unreadable. Then he reached back into the truck and pulled out a clipboard. Nora's stomach dropped. He was here for the house, and if he came inside, he'd find her. Worse, he might find the chest. She moved quickly, shoving the letters into her coat pocket and racing upstairs. She had to hide. She had to think. But as she reached the attic door, she heard it, the sound of the front door opening. Heavy boots on the hardwood floor. A man's voice, low and cautious. "Hello? Anyone here?" Nora pressed herself against the wall, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. This was it. Everything was about to change, and she had no idea if it would be for better or worse. Nora held her breath in the attic, listening to the heavy footsteps below. The man moved slowly through the cottage, his boots creaking on the floorboards with each careful step. She could hear him muttering to himself, though she couldn't make out the words. Her mind raced through possibilities. Was he a cop? A social worker looking for her? Someone who knew about the chest? She pressed herself tighter against the wall, praying the shadows would swallow her whole. The footsteps grew closer, moving up the main staircase now. Nora's eyes darted around the attic, searching for a better hiding spot. There was an old wardrobe in the corner, tall and wooden with ornate carvings. She moved toward it as quietly as possible, opened the door with trembling hands, and squeezed inside. Through the crack in the wardrobe door, she watched as the attic door swung open. The man's silhouette appeared in the doorway, backlit by the hallway light. He was bigger than she'd thought, broad-shouldered and solid. He swept a flashlight across the space, the beam cutting through the dusty air. "I know someone's here," he called out, his voice rough but not unkind. "The fire's been stoked. There's fresh dishes in the sink. I'm not here to hurt you. I just need to know who's in Eleanor's house." Nora's heart hammered against her ribs. He knew Eleanor. That changed things, but she wasn't sure how. The man took a step into the attic, then another. His flashlight beam swept past the wardrobe, and Nora pulled back deeper into the shadows. "Listen," he continued. "My name is Thomas Whitmore. Eleanor was my aunt. I've been maintaining this property for 23 years, keeping it exactly as she wanted. If you're here because you're in trouble, I can help, but you need to come out." Nora's mind spun. His aunt. He was family. Did that mean he had a claim to the chest, to the money? Eleanor's letter hadn't mentioned any family. She'd said she had no one left. Thomas moved closer to the wardrobe, and Nora realized with growing dread that he was going to find her anyway. There was nowhere else to go. She made a decision. Slowly, she pushed open the wardrobe door and stepped out. Thomas spun toward her, his flashlight landing on her face. She squinted against the brightness, raising one hand to shield her eyes. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Thomas lowered the flashlight, and in the dim attic light, Nora could see his face clearly. He had kind eyes, tired and sad, with deep lines around them that spoke of years spent worrying. His hair was grey at the temples, and his jaw was covered in stubble. "You're just a kid," he said softly, his voice thick with something that might have been grief or relief. "How old are you?" 10, Nora whispered. "What's your name?" "Nora. Nora Bennett." Thomas nodded slowly, then knelt down so they were at eye level. "Nora, how did you get here? Where are your parents?" The question hit like a punch to the gut. "I don't have any," she said, her voice barely audible. "I was in foster care. They left me here 3 days ago, told me to walk south, but I came here instead." Something shifted in Thomas's expression, a flash of anger followed by deep sadness. "They abandoned you? In Frost Haven? In December?" Nora nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Thomas stood and ran a hand over his face, muttering something under his breath that sounded like a curse. Then he looked back at her, his jaw set. "Okay, first things first. You must be starving. When's the last time you ate?" "This morning. I found food in the kitchen." "Good, that's good." He gestured toward the stairs. "Come on, let's get you downstairs where it's warm. We need to figure out what to do." Nora hesitated, her hand instinctively moving to her pocket where Eleanor's letters were hidden. "Are you going to call someone? Social services?" Thomas paused on the stairs, considering. "Eventually, yes. You need proper care, Nora, but right now it's Christmas Eve and it's nearly dark. No one's going to come out tonight anyway, so let's just get you fed and warm and we'll figure the rest out tomorrow. Deal?" It wasn't much of a choice, but something in his tone made her believe him. She nodded and followed him downstairs. In the kitchen, Thomas moved with familiar ease, pulling out bread, soup from the pantry, and setting a pot on the stove. The electricity worked because he'd been paying to keep it on, he explained. Same with the heat. He came out here twice a month to maintain the property, to keep it exactly as Eleanor had left it. "Why?" Nora asked, sitting at the kitchen table. "Why keep it like this?" Thomas stirred the soup slowly, his back to her. "Because my aunt made me promise. She knew she was dying. Cancer stage 4. She had maybe 6 months left. This was back in 1976, right before the town evacuated. She called me up to Vermont from Boston and made me swear I'd keep this place running. She said someone would need it one day, someone who had nowhere else to go. He turned to face Nora, his eyes glistening. I thought she was crazy. I thought grief was making her irrational. But she was so insistent, so certain that I couldn't say no. So I've been paying the bills, checking on it, keeping it warm. For 23 years, I've been waiting for whoever she meant. And now here you are. Nora's throat tightened. She left me letters. She said this place was for someone who needed it. Thomas set a bowl of soup in front of her, along with buttered bread. Then she meant you. My aunt was never wrong about these things. She had a way of knowing, of seeing what others couldn't. They ate in silence for a while. The soup was warm and rich, and Nora hadn't realized just how hungry she was until the first bite hit her tongue. Thomas watched her eat with a sad smile. You look like you haven't had a decent meal in weeks. Months, Nora admitted between bites. When the bowl was empty, Thomas poured her a glass of milk and sat down across from her. Nora, I need to be honest with you. This is complicated. You're a minor with no legal guardian. I can't just let you stay here without notifying someone. And this house, it's technically part of Eleanor's estate. I'm the executor, but there are laws about what happens to abandoned property. Nora's chest tightened with panic. Are you going to take it away from me? Take what away? Nora hesitated, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. This was the moment. She could tell him about the chest, about the $300 million sitting in the attic, or she could stay silent and risk losing everything. She thought of Eleanor's letter, of the warning not to let greed steal her heart. Thomas wasn't greedy. She could see that. But could she trust him? Eleanor left something for me, she said carefully. In the attic. She said in her letter that it was for whoever found the house. Thomas leaned forward, his expression serious. What kind of something? Nora pulled the letters from her pocket and slid them across the table. Thomas picked them up, his hands trembling slightly as he read. She watched his face change, shock, disbelief, understanding. When he finished, he set the letters down gently and looked at her with wide eyes. The chest, he breathed. She really did it. You knew about it? I knew she'd been saving, investing. Eleanor was brilliant with money, always had been. She lived simply, never spent much, but she played the stock market like a chess master. I knew she had wealth, but I had no idea it was this much. He rubbed his temples. $300 million. Jesus. Is it really mine? Nora asked, her voice small. Eleanor said it was, but I don't know how this works. I don't know if anyone will believe me. Thomas stood and paced the kitchen, his mind clearly racing. This is bigger than I thought. If what Eleanor wrote is true, if she intended for the finder to inherit everything, then legally you might have a claim. But it won't be simple. There will be questions, investigations. The state will want to know where the money came from, if it's legitimate. And you, a 10-year-old foster kid with no family, no documentation, they're going to fight you on this. Nora's eyes filled with tears. So they'll take it, just like they take everything. No, Thomas said firmly, kneeling in front of her chair. No, I won't let that happen. If Eleanor wanted you to have this, then by God you'll have it. But we need to be smart. We need a lawyer, a damn good one. And we need to document everything. The letters, the chest, the circumstances of how you found it. We build a case so airtight they can't tear it apart. Why would you help me? Nora asked, searching his face. You don't even know me. Thomas smiled sadly. Because Eleanor believed in you, and I've never known her to be wrong. Besides, I've spent 23 years honoring a promise to a dying woman. I'm not about to stop now. That night, Nora slept in one of the upstairs bedrooms. Thomas stayed downstairs on the couch, insisting she take the proper bed. Before she went up, he made her hot chocolate and sat with her by the fire. Tomorrow's Christmas, he said softly. When I was a kid, I used to spend every Christmas here with Eleanor. She'd make cookies shaped like stars and tell stories about the town before it died. This place was magic back then. What happened? Nora asked. Why did everyone leave? The mill closed, jobs disappeared, people couldn't afford to stay. One by one, families packed up and left. Eleanor refused. She said this was her home, and she'd die here if she had to. And she did. He stared into the fire. I was with her at the end. She made me promise one more time to keep the house ready. She said, "When the right person comes, you'll know. Help them, Thomas. Help them the way I couldn't help this town." Nora wiped at her eyes. She saved my life. "I think you saved hers too," Thomas said. "She died believing someone would come. You made that belief worth something." The next morning, Christmas Day, Nora woke to the smell of coffee and pancakes. She came downstairs to find Thomas in the kitchen, cooking breakfast like he'd done it 1,000 times. "Merry Christmas," he said with a tired smile. "I figured we should eat before we deal with all the heavy stuff." They ate together at the table, and for a brief moment it felt almost normal, like she had a family, like she belonged somewhere. After breakfast, Thomas made a call to a lawyer he knew in Boston, a woman named Patricia Hale, who specialized in estate law. He explained the situation carefully, and Nora listened as his tone shifted from cautious to insistent. "Patricia, I'm telling you, this is real. Eleanor left explicit instructions. The girl has letters, a key, everything. We need to protect her claim before someone tries to take it." There was a long pause as he listened. "Yes, I understand the complications. That's why I'm calling you. Can you come up here after the holiday? We need to move fast." When he hung up, he looked at Nora. "She'll be here the day after tomorrow. In the meantime, we document everything. Photos, videos, statements. We make this bulletproof." They spent the rest of Christmas Day doing exactly that. Thomas photographed the chest, the letters, the attic, every detail of the cottage. He had Nora tell her story on camera, starting from the moment the Carters abandoned her to the moment she found the key. "Tell it exactly as it happened," he instructed. "The truth is your best defense." That evening, as snow began to fall again, Nora sat by the fire with Thomas. He'd found an old box of Eleanor's things in a closet: photos, journals, mementos. "I want you to know who she was," he said, handing Nora a photograph. It showed a younger Eleanor, maybe 30, standing in front of a classroom full of children. She was laughing, her arms spread wide, surrounded by kids who clearly adored her. She taught here for 40 years. Every kid in Frosthaven went through her classroom. She believed education could change lives. That knowledge was the only real wealth. He showed her more photos. Eleanor at town festivals, Eleanor gardening, Eleanor reading on the porch of this very cottage. She never married, never had kids of her own. But she loved this town like it was her child. When it died, something in her died too. But she never stopped hoping it could come back. Nora traced her finger over one photo, feeling a connection to this woman she'd never met. "I wish I could have known her." "She knew you," Thomas said. "Maybe not your name or your face, but she knew your heart. That's why she left this for you." What happens next will test everything Nora thought she knew about justice, greed, and the people who claim to protect children. A battle is coming that will shake this forgotten town to its core and reveal truths about Eleanor's fortune that even Thomas never expected. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. 2 days later, Patricia Hale arrived. She was a sharp woman in her 50s with steel grey hair pulled into a tight bun and eyes that missed nothing. She set her briefcase on the kitchen table and got straight to business. "Let me see everything," she said. Thomas handed over the letters, the photos, the videos. Patricia read through each document carefully, her expression unreadable. Nora sat across from her, hands folded in her lap, trying not to fidget. Finally, Patricia looked up. "This is extraordinary. If authentic, these letters constitute a clear testamentary intent. Eleanor Whitmore intended for the finder of this property to inherit her assets. The question is whether we can prove it holds up legally." "Can we?" Thomas asked. Patricia tapped her pen against the table. It's complicated. Eleanor died intestate, without a formal will filed with the probate court. These letters could be considered holographic wills, which are valid in Vermont if they meet certain criteria. But there will be challenges. What kind of challenges? Nora asked quietly. Patricia turned to her, and for the first time, her expression softened. The state will argue that a 10-year-old cannot legally inherit such a massive estate without proper guardianship. They'll want to place you in foster care and assign a state-appointed trustee to manage the assets until you're 18. That trustee could be anyone, and they may not have your best interests at heart. Nora's stomach dropped. So they'll take it. Not if we move first, Patricia said. We petition the court to recognize the holographic will and to appoint Thomas as your legal guardian and trustee. He's Eleanor's nephew. He's been maintaining the property for decades, and he has a clear connection to her intent. If we can show the court that this arrangement serves your best interest, we have a shot. Thomas straightened. I'll do it, whatever it takes. Patricia nodded. Good. But there's more. We need to verify the assets in that chest. If the contents are as valuable as Eleanor claimed, we're looking at significant tax implications, not to mention the legal questions around how she acquired such wealth. We'll need forensic accountants, appraisers, possibly investigators. How long will all this take? Nora asked. Months, maybe years. Estate litigation is notoriously slow, especially when the sums are this large. In the meantime, the assets will likely be frozen until the court makes a determination. Nora felt the weight of it settling over her like snow. So I won't be able to use any of it? Not right away, Patricia admitted. But Thomas can petition for interim support to cover your immediate needs: housing, food, education, medical care. The court usually grants that. Over the next week, the machine of bureaucracy began to turn. Patricia filed an emergency petition with the Vermont Probate Court requesting recognition of Eleanor's holographic will and temporary guardianship for Thomas. Social services got involved, sending a caseworker named Miss Brennan to interview Nora. Miss Brennan was a tired woman in her 40s with kind eyes but a weary voice. She sat across from Nora in the cottage living room and asked question after question. Where had she come from? Who were her previous foster families? Why had the Carters abandoned her? Nora answered as truthfully as she could, though every question felt like reopening a wound. When Miss Brennan asked about the chest, Nora showed her the letters. The caseworker read them slowly, her expression shifting from skepticism to something closer to wonder. This is remarkable, she said finally. But I have to be honest with you, Nora. The system doesn't usually work in favor of kids like you. There are protocols, procedures, people who will want to control this situation. I just want to stay here, Nora said. With Thomas, with this house. Miss Brennan studied her for a long moment. I believe you, and I'll put that in my report. But I can't make promises. The court decides. By the second week of January 1999, word had begun to spread. Someone, Nora never found out who, leaked the story to a local newspaper. The headline read, "Abandoned girl discovers fortune in ghost town cottage." The article was mostly accurate, though it sensationalized parts, calling Nora a modern-day Cinderella and Eleanor a reclusive heiress. Within days, the story went regional, then national. News vans rolled into Frost Haven, their cameras pointed at the cottage. Reporters knocked on the door, shouting questions. Thomas refused to let them in, but that didn't stop them from filming through the windows and interviewing anyone who claimed to know anything about Eleanor Whitmore. The attention brought something worse: claimants. By the end of January, 7 different people had come forward, each insisting they had a right to Eleanor's estate. There was a man who claimed to be Eleanor's second cousin twice removed. A woman who said she'd been Eleanor's student and deserved recognition. Even a lawyer from New York who argued that Eleanor's assets should be turned over to the state since she'd died without a valid will. Patricia fought each claim methodically, filing motions and presenting evidence. But the pressure was mounting. One afternoon, Thomas sat Nora down at the kitchen table, his face grave. I need you to understand something. This fight is going to get uglier before it gets better. People are going to say things about you, about Eleanor, about me. They're going to try to discredit us, to make it seem like we're taking advantage of a dead woman's confusion. But we're not, Nora said. I know that, and you know that. But the court needs to be convinced. And some people don't want the truth. They just want the money. That night, Nora lay awake in her bedroom, staring at the ceiling. She thought about Eleanor's warning in the letter. Do not let greed steal your heart. She wondered if Eleanor had known this would happen, if she'd understood that leaving a fortune to an unknown finder would unleash chaos. Maybe that was the test. Maybe Eleanor wanted to see if Nora would fight for what was right, not just what was valuable. The preliminary hearing was set for early February. Patricia prepared Nora extensively, running through potential questions, teaching her how to stay calm under pressure. The judge is going to look at you and see a child, Patricia said. That can work for us or against us. If you seem coached or manipulative, they'll assume Thomas is using you. But if you're honest, sincere, and clear about what Eleanor wanted, they'll listen. On the day of the hearing, Nora wore a simple blue dress that Thomas had bought for her. They drove to the courthouse in Burlington, a 2-hour drive through snow-covered mountains. The building was imposing, all stone and glass, with steps that seemed to climb forever. Inside, the courtroom was smaller than Nora had imagined, but no less intimidating. The judge, a woman named Evelyn Carr, sat behind a high bench, her expression neutral. Patricia sat at one table with Thomas and Nora. At the other table sat an attorney representing the state, a sharp-faced man named Douglas Reeve. He looked at Nora like she was a problem to be solved. Judge Carr called the hearing to order. This is a preliminary hearing to determine the validity of the alleged holographic will of Eleanor Whitmore and the petition for temporary guardianship of Nora Bennett. Miss Hale, you may begin. Patricia stood and presented the case clearly and methodically. She entered Eleanor's letters as evidence, along with the photographs, Thomas's testimony about his aunt's intent, and Nora's account of how she found the cottage. Douglas Reeve countered aggressively. He argued that the letters were too vague to constitute a will, that Eleanor's mental state at the time of writing was questionable, and that allowing a child to inherit such a fortune without state oversight was reckless. Your Honor, he said, this girl is 10 years old. She has no family, no support system, no understanding of what this kind of wealth entails. To hand her $300 million and expect her to manage it responsibly is absurd. The state must intervene to protect her interests. Judge Carr turned to Nora. Miss Bennett, I'd like to hear from you directly. Can you tell me, in your own words, what happened? Nora stood, her legs shaking. She gripped the edge of the table for support. I was left in Frosthaven on Christmas Eve. I didn't know where to go, and I was freezing. I saw the cottage and went inside because I thought I was going to die. When I found Eleanor's letters, I didn't understand at first, but she said the house and everything in it was for whoever needed it most. That was me. I needed it. Her voice cracked. I'm not trying to take something that isn't mine. Eleanor left it for me. She said so. Judge Carr studied her for a long moment. And if the court grants you this inheritance, what will you do with it? Nora thought of Eleanor's words. I'll use it to help people. Kids like me who don't have anywhere to go. I'll make sure they have a place to be safe. The courtroom was silent. Judge Carr made a note on her pad. Thank you, Miss Bennett. You may sit. The hearing lasted 3 more hours. Witnesses were called, documents examined, arguments made. By the end, Nora felt wrung out, exhausted. Judge Carr finally spoke. This is a highly unusual case. The court will need time to review the evidence and consider the legal precedents. I will issue a ruling within 30 days. In the meantime, I am granting temporary guardianship of Nora Bennett to Thomas Whitmore, with the understanding that this arrangement is provisional and subject to review. The assets in question will remain frozen until a final determination is made. She banged her gavel. Court adjourned. Patricia turned to Nora with a small smile. That's the best we could have hoped for. We have time now. But as they left the courtroom, Nora saw Douglas Reeve watching her from across the hall. His expression was cold, calculating. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Back at the cottage, Thomas made them dinner while Patricia reviewed her notes. Nora sat by the fire, staring into the flames. She felt older somehow, like the hearing had aged her. "You did well today," Thomas said, sitting beside her. "Eleanor would be proud." Nora looked at him. "Do you think we'll win?" "I think we'll fight like hell," he said, "and that's all we can do." That night, Nora went up to the attic and sat in front of the chest. She didn't open it. She just placed her hand on the wood, feeling the weight of everything it represented. "I won't let them take this," she whispered. "I promise." Outside, the wind howled through the empty streets of Frost Haven, and somewhere in the darkness, unseen forces were already moving, plotting, scheming. The battle for Eleanor's fortune had only just begun. The weeks following the hearing felt like living in a fishbowl. News crews remained camped outside the cottage gates, their cameras trained on every window, every movement. Nora couldn't step onto the porch without a dozen lenses swiveling in her direction. Thomas installed curtains in every room, thick and heavy, blocking out both the cameras and the curious stares of strangers who drove hours just to glimpse the fortune girl. Patricia called every few days with updates, most of them frustrating. 3 more claimants had emerged, each with increasingly dubious connections to Eleanor Whitmore. One woman insisted she'd been Eleanor's cleaning lady in 1974 and deserved compensation for years of unpaid emotional labor. A man from California claimed Eleanor had promised him money in a letter that conveniently no longer existed. The most troubling claim came from a corporation called Heritage Reclamation LLC. They argued that since Frost Haven had been officially declared abandoned by the state in 1983, all property within town limits, including Eleanor's cottage, had reverted to state ownership. Therefore, everything inside the cottage, including the chest and its contents, belonged to the people of Vermont. "It's bullshit," Thomas said when Patricia explained it over speakerphone. "Eleanor owned this property outright. The deed is clear." "I know," Patricia replied, her voice tight with frustration. "But Heritage Reclamation has deep pockets and political connections. They've hired one of the most aggressive litigation firms in New England. This isn't about justice for them. It's about getting a piece of $300 million. Nora sat at the kitchen table, listening, her stomach churning. Every day brought a new threat, a new person trying to tear away what Eleanor had left her. She'd barely had time to process the magnitude of the inheritance before the world descended, demanding she prove she deserved it. "What do we do?" Nora asked quietly. "We keep building our case," Patricia said, "and we find more evidence of Eleanor's intent, letters, journals, anything that shows she specifically wanted the finder to inherit. The stronger we can make that connection, the harder it becomes for these vultures to pick the bones." After the call ended, Thomas turned to Nora. "There's something I haven't told you. Eleanor kept journals, dozens of them. I packed them away when she died, stored them in my basement in Boston. I didn't think they'd be relevant, but now—" He trailed off. "I think we need to read them." "How soon can you get them?" Nora asked. "I'll drive down tomorrow." That night, Nora couldn't sleep. She lay in the bedroom that had once been Eleanor's, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the woman who had lived here. What had driven her to save so meticulously? What had made her believe that hiding a fortune and leaving cryptic instructions would work? She got out of bed and walked through the cottage in the darkness, running her hands along the walls, the furniture, the banister. Everywhere she touched felt alive with memory, with Eleanor's presence. In the living room, she stopped in front of the bookshelf. Hundreds of titles lined the shelves, spanning decades. Literature, history, philosophy, science. Nora pulled one down at random, a worn copy of Jane Eyre with notes in the margins, Eleanor's handwriting. One note, written beside a passage about resilience, read, "We are not defined by what is done to us, but by what we choose to do next." Nora closed the book carefully and returned it to the shelf. She understood now. Eleanor hadn't just left money. She'd left a philosophy, a challenge. Survive what life throws at you, then choose to build something better. Thomas returned 2 days later with 3 boxes filled with leather-bound journals. They spread them across the dining room table, organized by year. The earliest dated back to 1956, when Eleanor was just 23. The most recent was from 1976, weeks before her death. "Where do we start?" Nora asked, overwhelmed by the sheer volume. "The end," Patricia said. She'd driven up from Boston specifically for this. If Eleanor was planning this inheritance, she would have written about it near the end of her life. They opened the final journal together. Eleanor's handwriting had grown shakier toward the end, the letters less precise, but the words were clear. March 14th, 1976. Dr. Morrison confirmed what I already knew. 6 months, maybe less. The cancer has spread too far for treatment to matter. I'm not afraid of dying. I've lived a full life, rich in ways that have nothing to do with money. But I am afraid of what happens to everything I've built. Thomas means well, but he doesn't understand. This isn't about inheritance in the traditional sense. This is about faith. Patricia flipped the page. April 2nd, 1976. I've begun preparations. The chest is ready, filled with everything I've saved over 43 years. Stocks, bonds, cash, jewelry my mother left me. It's worth millions now, perhaps more by the time someone finds it. I've written the letters, hidden the key. Thomas thinks I'm being sentimental, but he promised to maintain the cottage. That's all I need from him. The rest is up to fate, or God, or whatever force guides lost souls to safe harbors. Nora's throat tightened. She flipped forward several pages. May 20th, 1976. The town is dying. Another family left today, the Hendersons. They didn't even say goodbye. Soon it will just be me and the memories. But I'm not sad. I believe in cycles. Death, rebirth. This town will fade, but something will grow from its ashes. Someone will come who needs what I'm leaving behind. Someone who understands that wealth without purpose is just paper and metal. I won't live to meet them, but I trust they exist. Thomas wiped at his eyes. She really believed it. She didn't just believe it, Patricia said, scanning ahead. She planned for it legally. Listen to this. June 8th, 1976. I've consulted with 3 different attorneys, each one skeptical of my plan. They say holographic wills are risky, that without proper witnesses and probate filing, the estate could be contested. But that's the point. I don't want this going through probate. I don't want the state deciding who deserves my life's work. I want the universe to decide. So I've written everything in my own hand, dated and signed each letter, and made my intentions explicit. The cottage and all its contents belong to whoever finds it in their hour of need. Let the lawyers argue. The truth will be clear to anyone with a heart. Patricia sat back, a slow smile spreading across her face. This is it. This is exactly what we need. Eleanor knew her will would be contested. She anticipated it, and she documented her reasoning. This isn't the confused ramblings of a dying woman. This is a deliberate, carefully planned testamentary intent. Over the next week, they combed through every journal, pulling passages that supported Eleanor's plan. They found dozens of entries detailing her investments, her savings strategy, her growing conviction that traditional inheritance structures were flawed. September 3rd, 1968. Invested $3,000 in a new company called Intel. Mr. Bradshaw at the bank thinks I'm insane. What does a schoolteacher know about technology? He asked. More than he thinks. I've been reading everything I can about integrated circuits. This is the future. January 15th, 1972. Intel stock has increased 40-fold. Mr. Bradshaw no longer questions my investment choices. I've diversified into real estate, municipal bonds, and a small pharmaceutical company called Merck. The portfolio is now worth just over $2 million. Not bad for a woman who makes $12,000 a year teaching grammar to children. Nora marveled at the numbers, at Eleanor's quiet brilliance. She hadn't inherited wealth. She'd built it through discipline, research, and patience. But the journals revealed something else too. Loneliness. Entry after entry spoke of long evenings alone, of students who grew up and moved away, of a town slowly emptying until Eleanor was the last one left. December 24th, 1975, Christmas Eve, and I am utterly alone. The Porters left last week, the Johnsons the week before. I walked through town today and didn't see a single light in any window except my own. This is what death looks like. Not dramatic, not sudden, just slow, quiet erasure. But I will not leave. This is my home. Let me be the last candle burning. Nora felt tears sliding down her cheeks. She understood that loneliness, that feeling of being the last one left. Eleanor had lived it for years, and still, she'd held on to hope that someone would come. Patricia compiled everything into a comprehensive legal brief, over 200 pages documenting Eleanor's intent, her mental competency, and the legitimacy of her estate planning. She filed it with the probate court, along with a motion to dismiss all competing claims. "This is our best shot," she told Thomas and Nora. "If the judge reads this and still rules against us, then the system is more broken than I thought." The response from Heritage Reclamation came swift and vicious. Their attorneys filed a counter-motion arguing that Eleanor's journals proved she was mentally unstable, that her refusal to leave Frosthaven despite its abandonment showed impaired judgment, and that her unconventional estate planning was evidence of diminished capacity. "They're calling her crazy," Thomas said, his voice shaking with rage. "My aunt, who had more intelligence and compassion in her little finger than these parasites have in their entire bodies." Douglas Reeve, the state's attorney, doubled down as well. He filed a motion to have Nora removed from Thomas's care, arguing that the media attention and legal stress were harmful to her development. He wanted her placed in a state facility for her own protection until the case was resolved. Nora read the motion with growing horror. They wanted to take her away from the cottage, from Thomas, from the only place she'd ever felt safe. "They can't do this," she said, her voice rising. "They can't just take me." "They can try," Patricia said grimly, "but we're going to fight it. I've already filed an opposition. You're thriving here, Nora. You're healthy, enrolled in online school, seeing a therapist twice a week. Thomas has provided everything you need. There's no legal basis to remove you." But the damage was done. The motion made headlines. "State seeks to remove Fortune Girl from Guardian," read one. "Is Nora Bennett being exploited?" asked another. "Talk shows debated whether a 10-year-old should have access to hundreds of millions." Financial experts weighed in on whether the money should be held in trust until she turned 35. Everyone had an opinion about what should happen to Nora's life, except Nora herself. The worst came from social media. Thomas tried to keep Nora away from it, but she found his laptop one afternoon and searched her own name. The comments were brutal. Some called her a liar, a con artist, a child being manipulated by greedy adults. Others said she didn't deserve the money, that it should go to real charities or back to the government. A few were supportive, but they were drowned out by the vitriol. Nora slammed the laptop shut and ran upstairs, locking herself in the bathroom. She sat on the floor, her back against the tub, and sobbed. She hadn't asked for any of this. She'd just been trying to survive. And now the whole world hated her for it. Thomas found her there 20 minutes later. He knocked softly on the door. "Nora? Can I come in?" She unlocked the door silently. Thomas entered and sat on the floor beside her, his back against the tub too. "You saw the comments," he said quietly. She nodded. People are scared of things they don't understand. A child inheriting a fortune, it doesn't fit their worldview, so they lash out. But that doesn't make them right. "What if they are right?" Nora whispered. "What if I don't deserve this?" Thomas turned to look at her, his expression fierce. "Eleanor didn't leave her fortune to someone who deserved it. She left it to someone who needed it. You needed it, Nora. You were freezing to death in the snow. You had nothing and no one. Don't let these people make you feel guilty for surviving." "But what if the judge agrees with them? What if she says I can't have it?" "Then we appeal. And if we lose the appeal, we appeal again. We fight until there's nothing left to fight with. Because this isn't just about money. It's about honoring Eleanor's wishes. And I promised her I would." Nora leaned her head against his shoulder. "I'm scared." "Me too," Thomas admitted. "But we're scared together, and that counts for something." The final hearing was scheduled for late March. In the weeks leading up to it, Patricia prepared relentlessly. She hired 3 expert witnesses, a psychiatrist to testify about Eleanor's mental competency based on her journals, a handwriting analyst to verify the authenticity of the letters, and an estate planning specialist to explain why holographic wills, while unusual, were completely valid under Vermont law. Thomas transformed the cottage's dining room into a war room, with documents spread across every surface, timelines tacked to the walls, and color-coded folders for each competing claim. Nora helped where she could, organizing papers, making copies, highlighting relevant passages in the journals. One evening, as they worked late into the night, Nora found an entry she hadn't seen before. It was dated July 3rd, 1976, just weeks before Eleanor died. "I had a dream last night. I was standing in the cottage, looking out the window at fresh snow. The town was silent, as it is now. But then I heard footsteps on the porch. I opened the door, and there stood a child. I couldn't see the face clearly, but I knew immediately. This was the one, the person I'd been waiting for. I invited the child inside, gave them hot chocolate, wrapped them in blankets. And as I did, I felt a peace I haven't felt in months. The cancer, the pain, the fear, it all faded, because I knew my purpose had been fulfilled. When I woke, I was crying, not from sadness, but from gratitude. Whoever you are, child from my dream, thank you. Thank you for giving my life meaning, even in its final chapter." Nora's hands trembled as she read. She looked up at Thomas, who was watching her with wet eyes. "She dreamed about me," Nora whispered. "Or someone like you," Thomas said gently. "But yes, I think she did." Nora carefully placed the journal entry in the folder marked Primary Evidence. It felt sacred holding these words. Eleanor had seen her across time and death, and had left everything she had in faith that the dream was real. The day of the final hearing arrived cold and grey. Nora wore the same blue dress from the preliminary hearing, now altered because she'd grown 2 inches. Thomas wore a suit that looked uncomfortable on him, and Patricia carried 3 briefcases filled with evidence. The courtroom was packed. Journalists filled the gallery, along with several of the claimants and their attorneys. Heritage Reclamation had sent a full legal team, 6 people in matching suits who looked like they ate small-town lawyers for breakfast. Judge Carr entered, and everyone stood. She surveyed the room with a stern expression before sitting. "This has been one of the most complex and contentious cases I've presided over in 20 years on the bench," she began. "The court has reviewed thousands of pages of evidence, testimony, and legal arguments. Today we will hear final statements from each party, after which I will issue my ruling. Let's begin." Douglas Reeve went first, arguing passionately that the state had a duty to protect Nora from exploitation and to ensure Eleanor's assets were managed responsibly. He painted Thomas as a well-meaning but unqualified guardian and suggested that Nora, at 10 years old, couldn't possibly understand the implications of inheriting such wealth. The Heritage Reclamation attorneys argued that Eleanor's refusal to file a proper will showed intent to eschew traditional inheritance structures, which meant the assets should revert to public ownership. They cited obscure property laws and precedents from the 1800s. One of the individual claimants, a man named Gerald Whitmore, who claimed to be Eleanor's 3rd cousin, gave an emotional speech about family duty and how Eleanor would have wanted her blood relatives to benefit. Then it was Patricia's turn. She stood slowly, buttoned her jacket, and approached the bench. "Your Honor, this case is not complicated. It only seems that way because greedy people are trying to make it so. Eleanor Whitmore was brilliant, compassionate, and completely sane when she made her estate plan. She documented her intentions across hundreds of journal entries spanning decades. She consulted with attorneys. She knew her plan was unconventional, and she chose it anyway because she believed in something our legal system often forgets, that sometimes the spirit of the law matters more than the letter." Patricia placed a hand on the stack of journals. Eleanor wanted her fortune to go to someone who needed it desperately, who had nowhere else to turn. She wanted to give hope to a person the system had failed. Nora Bennett is that person. She was abandoned, left to die in the cold. She found Eleanor's cottage by chance, or by fate, depending on your beliefs. She followed Eleanor's instructions to the letter. She opened the chest, she read the letters, and she understood what Eleanor wanted because she lived it. Patricia's voice grew stronger. The state argues that Nora is too young to inherit, but inheritance doesn't require maturity. It requires legal entitlement, and Nora has that. Heritage reclamation argues the property reverted to the state. But Eleanor's deed is clear and has been maintained through continuous tax payments by Thomas Whitmore. The individual claimants argue blood relation, but Eleanor explicitly rejected that in her writings. She had no interest in enriching distant relatives she'd never met. She wanted to change one person's life completely. She wanted to prove that generosity can transcend death. Patricia turned to Nora. This child has been through hell. She's been questioned, investigated, attacked in the media, and threatened with removal from the only stable home she's ever known. All because she had the misfortune of surviving. Eleanor Whitmore would be horrified by what we've put this girl through. The only way to honor Eleanor's memory is to do what she asked. Give Nora the inheritance. Let her build the life Eleanor dreamed for her. Let her prove that one person's faith in humanity wasn't misplaced. The courtroom was silent when Patricia sat down. Even the journalists had stopped typing. Judge Carr made a note, then looked directly at Nora. "Miss Bennett, would you like to say anything before I rule?" Nora hadn't prepared a statement. Patricia had advised against it, worried she'd be too nervous. But now, looking at the judge's face, she knew she had to speak. She stood on trembling legs. "Your Honor, I didn't ask for this. I just wanted to be warm. I wanted to stop being scared. Eleanor gave me that. She gave me a place where I could breathe. I know people think I'm too young, or that I don't deserve it, or that I'm being used. But Eleanor trusted me. She trusted that whoever found her cottage would understand what she was trying to do. And I do understand. She wanted to show that one person can make a difference, that kindness doesn't die when we do. If you give me this inheritance, I promise I'll use it the way she wanted. I'll help kids like me. I'll make sure no one else has to freeze in the snow wondering if anyone cares whether they live or die." Her voice cracked on the last word, but she forced herself to continue. "Eleanor saved my life. Please don't let them take that away from her." Nora sat down, her heart pounding so hard she thought everyone could hear it. Judge Carr studied her for a long moment, then looked at the documents in front of her. "I'll issue my ruling after a short recess." The 15-minute recess felt like hours. Nora sat between Thomas and Patricia, unable to speak, barely able to breathe. Around them, people whispered and speculated. The heritage reclamation lawyers looked confident. Douglas Reeve looked grim. Finally, the bailiff called everyone back. Judge Carr entered and sat, her expression unreadable. "I've considered all evidence and arguments presented over the past 3 months," she began. "This case requires me to balance several competing interests: the wishes of the deceased, the welfare of a minor child, the interests of potential heirs, and the integrity of our estate laws." Nora gripped Thomas's hand so hard her knuckles turned white. "After careful consideration, I find the following. 1. Eleanor Whitmore's holographic will, as expressed in her dated and signed letters, meets the legal requirements for validity under Vermont law. 2. The evidence overwhelmingly shows that Eleanor was of sound mind when she created her estate plan, and that her unconventional approach was intentional, not the result of diminished capacity. 3. None of the competing claimants have demonstrated legal standing superior to that of Nora Bennett, who fulfilled Eleanor's explicit conditions by finding the cottage in genuine need. Patricia's hand flew to her mouth. Thomas closed his eyes. "Therefore, I rule that Nora Bennett is the rightful heir to Eleanor Whitmore's estate, including all assets contained within the chest and the cottage property itself. Further, I find that Thomas Whitmore has provided excellent care as guardian and see no reason to disrupt that arrangement. His guardianship is made permanent, with full authority to manage the estate in trust for Miss Bennet until she reaches the age of 25, at which point full control will transfer to her. Judge Carr looked at Nora, and for the first time she smiled. Miss Bennet, Eleanor Whitmore believed in you before she ever met you. I hope you'll prove her faith was warranted. This court is adjourned. The gavel fell. For a moment, no one moved. Then Patricia let out a whoop of joy and threw her arms around Thomas. Nora sat frozen, unable to process what she'd just heard. They'd won. They'd actually won. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Journalists rushed for the doors, shouting into phones. The heritage reclamation lawyers gathered their briefcases with stiff, angry movements. Douglas Reeve shook Patricia's hand with professional courtesy, though his expression was sour. Thomas pulled Nora into a hug so tight she could barely breathe. We did it, he whispered. Eleanor's wish came true. Nora burst into tears, not from sadness, but from overwhelming relief. It was over. The fight was over. She was safe. She was home. And Eleanor's gift was finally, truly hers. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions. Patricia held up a hand. We'll have a statement tomorrow. For now, let this child celebrate in peace. They pushed through the crowd to Thomas's truck and drove away, leaving the circus behind. The 3-hour drive back to Frosthaven was quiet, each of them lost in their own thoughts. When they finally pulled up to the cottage, the sun was setting, painting the snow gold and pink. Nora stepped out of the truck and looked at the cottage, her cottage now, legally and completely. The windows glowed warm. The wreath still hung on the door. It looked exactly as it had the night she'd stumbled here, frozen and afraid. But everything was different now. She was different. Thomas put a hand on her shoulder. Ready to go home? Nora smiled, really smiled, for the first time in months. Yeah, let's go home. The morning after the ruling, Nora woke to silence. Not the oppressive silence of fear, but the peaceful quiet of a battle finally won. She lay in bed for a long moment, staring at the ceiling, letting the reality sink in. The cottage was hers. The fortune was hers. And more importantly, she had a future that stretched beyond mere survival. She got up and walked to the window. Outside, the news vans were gone. The reporters had moved on to the next story, the next tragedy, the next spectacle. Frosthaven looked the way it must have looked for decades, silent, snow-covered, forgotten. Except it wasn't forgotten anymore, not to her. Downstairs, Thomas was already up, making coffee and pancakes. The kitchen smelled like butter and maple syrup, like normalcy, like home. He looked up when she entered and smiled. Morning, heiress. How does it feel to be one of the richest kids in America? Nora sat at the table, pulling her knees up to her chest. Weird. Really weird. Like I'm going to wake up and it'll all be gone. It's not going anywhere, Thomas assured her. Patricia's already working with the accountants and appraisers. It'll take months to get everything sorted, but the assets are secure, protected, yours. What do we do now? Nora asked. Thomas set a plate of pancakes in front of her. Now? We figure out what you want your life to look like. You're 11 years old, Nora. You should be thinking about school, friends, hobbies, not legal battles and inheritance taxes. But I can't just pretend the money doesn't exist. No, Thomas agreed. But you also can't let it define you. Eleanor didn't want that. She wanted you to use it as a tool, not a cage. They ate breakfast together, and for the first time in months, conversation felt easy. They talked about small things, whether to plant a garden in the spring, what books Nora wanted to read, whether they should get a dog. The weight of the inheritance sat in the background, ever present but no longer crushing. After breakfast, Patricia called. I've got news. The final appraisal came in. The total value of Eleanor's estate, including stocks, bonds, real estate holdings we didn't even know about, and the physical assets in the chest, comes to $387 million. Nora's breath caught. That's more than she said. Her investments continued to grow after she died. Patricia explained. Thomas kept everything exactly as she left it, which means the stock split, the bonds matured, and the real estate appreciated. Eleanor wasn't just smart, she was a genius. If she'd lived another decade, this could have been $1 billion estate. Thomas ran a hand through his hair. Jesus, what do we do with that kind of money? Well, first we pay the estate taxes, which will be substantial. Then we set up a proper trust structure. I'm recommending a charitable trust with Nora as the primary beneficiary and Thomas as trustee. That way, the money can start doing good immediately, while also providing for Nora's needs. Education, housing, healthcare, all covered. And when she turns 25, she'll have full control to continue the charitable work or redirect as she sees fit. What kind of charitable work? Nora asked. Patricia's voice softened. That's up to you, Nora. But based on what you said in court, I'm guessing you want to help kids in foster care, kids who've been abandoned or abused. Am I right? Nora thought of all the homes she'd been in, all the nights she'd cried herself to sleep wondering if anyone would ever choose her, ever keep her, ever love her. Yeah, that's exactly what I want. Then that's what we'll do. Over the next several weeks, Patricia worked with financial advisors, accountants, and non-profit specialists to structure the trust. They called it the Eleanor Whitmore Foundation for Lost Children. The mission was simple: provide safe housing, education, and emotional support for children aging out of foster care or in crisis situations. Nora insisted on being involved in every decision. She might be 11, but this was her foundation, Eleanor's legacy, and she refused to be sidelined. She sat in on conference calls, asked questions, and pushed back when adults tried to make decisions without her input. We need to make sure the kids feel safe, she said during one planning meeting. Not just physically safe, but emotionally. They need to know they're not just another case file, another number. They need to feel seen. The non-profit director, a woman named Rachel Kim, who'd spent 20 years in social work, nodded approvingly. You understand this better than most adults, Nora. What else? They need choices, Nora continued. In foster care, everything is decided for you. What you eat, what you wear, where you go. We should let them have control over the small things. Let them pick their room colors, choose their own clothes, decide what activities they want to try. Little freedoms matter. Rachel made notes. This is good, really good. You're thinking like someone who's lived it. I have lived it, Nora said quietly. That's the point. By late April of 1999, the foundation was officially registered as a 501c3 non-profit. The first project was ambitious: renovate a former boarding school in Burlington into a residential facility for up to 30 kids aged 14 to 18. The building had been abandoned for years, but the bones were good. With Eleanor's money, they could transform it into something beautiful. Nora insisted on visiting the site before renovation began. Thomas drove her to Burlington on a rainy Saturday morning. The building stood 3 stories tall, red brick with white trim, surrounded by overgrown grounds that had once been athletic fields and gardens. Windows were boarded up, and the front steps were cracked, but Nora could see what it could become. This is perfect, she said, standing in the rain, staring up at the building. Thomas raised an eyebrow. It's a wreck. So was I when Eleanor found me. But I had potential. She turned to him. This place has potential too. They hired a team of architects and contractors. Nora attended every planning meeting, often the only child in rooms full of adults. At first, the adults talked over her, around her, like she was a mascot rather than a stakeholder. But Nora had learned to fight in courtrooms. Conference rooms were easy by comparison. Excuse me, she interrupted during one meeting where they were discussing dormitory-style bedrooms. Why are we putting 4 kids to a room? The lead architect, a man named David, looked at her with barely concealed condescension. It's standard for facilities like this, cost-effective and efficient. It's also horrible, Nora shot back. Kids in foster care never get privacy. They're always sharing space, always being watched. We have the money to give them their own rooms, so why aren't we? David glanced at Thomas, clearly expecting him to rein her in. Thomas just smiled. She's right. Redesign it. Individual rooms. The dynamic shifted after that. The adults started directing questions to Nora, asking her opinion, actually listening to her answers. She pushed for large common areas where kids could gather if they wanted community, but also have the option to retreat to private space. She insisted on a library, a music room, and an art studio. She wanted the facility to feel less like an institution and more like a home. These kids have been through trauma, she explained to the interior designer. Everything about this place should say you're safe here, you matter here. Warm colors, comfortable furniture, lots of natural light, nothing institutional. By June, construction was underway. Nora visited the site weekly, watching as walls were torn down and rebuilt, as new windows were installed, as the grounds were cleared and landscaped. She felt a deep satisfaction seeing Eleanor's money turn into something tangible, something that would outlast both of them. But the foundation was just one part of her new life. Thomas had enrolled her in a small private school in Burlington starting in the fall. She'd be in 6th grade, her first time in a traditional classroom since 3rd grade. The prospect terrified her. "What if the other kids know who I am?" she asked Thomas one evening. "What if they treat me different?" "Some will," Thomas said honestly. "Some will be weird about the money, or jealous or overly friendly for the wrong reasons. But some will just see Nora, and those are the ones worth knowing." Her first day of school arrived in early September. Thomas drove her to the campus, a small progressive school with only 200 students total. Nora wore jeans and a simple sweater, determined not to stand out. But she knew it was futile. Everyone knew who she was. In homeroom, she took a seat in the back and tried to be invisible. It worked for about 10 minutes. Then a girl with dark, curly hair and glasses plopped into the seat next to her. "You're Nora Bennett, right? The fortune girl." Nora tensed. "Yeah." "Cool. I'm Maya. My mum says you're funding a bunch of foster care programs. That's pretty badass for someone our age." Nora blinked, surprised. "Thanks." "No problem. Hey, do you know anything about pre-algebra? Because I'm completely lost and we have a quiz on Friday." And just like that, Nora had her first real friend. Maya didn't care about the money or the media attention. She cared about math homework and whether the cafeteria was serving the good pizza or the cardboard kind. Over the next few weeks, Nora met other kids who treated her normally, or as normally as possible given the circumstances. She joined the book club, started taking art classes, and discovered she was surprisingly good at volleyball. Life began to feel almost ordinary. She'd wake up, go to school, do homework, have dinner with Thomas, and go to bed. The foundation work continued in the background. Patricia and Rachel handled most of the day-to-day operations, but Nora stayed involved in big decisions. She reviewed applications for the first round of residents, reading each story with a heavy heart. So many kids needed help. The facility could only hold 30, but hundreds applied. "How do we choose?" she asked Rachel during one review session. "We prioritize the most acute need," Rachel explained. "Kids aging out of the system with nowhere to go. Kids fleeing abusive situations. Kids who've been rejected by multiple placements. The most vulnerable." Nora read through application after application. Each one was a story of survival, of resilience, of hope hanging by a thread. She saw herself in every single one. By October, they'd selected the first 30 residents. The facility was scheduled to open in January of 2000. Nora insisted on being there for move-in day, wanted to meet each kid personally, to welcome them the way Eleanor had welcomed her, with warmth, with safety, with the promise that they mattered. As Christmas approached, Nora found herself thinking more and more about Eleanor. It had been almost a year since that frozen Christmas Eve when she'd stumbled into the cottage. A year since her life had changed in ways she still couldn't fully comprehend. She asked Thomas if they could spend Christmas at the cottage, just the two of them, to honor Eleanor's memory. On Christmas Eve, they drove to Frost Haven. The town looked exactly the same. Abandoned, silent, beautiful in its decay. The cottage stood like a beacon, its windows glowing against the winter darkness. Inside, Nora had insisted they decorate exactly as Eleanor had. The same tree in the same corner, the same garland on the mantel, the same stockings hung by the fireplace. Thomas made hot chocolate while Nora sat by the fire, staring at Eleanor's photograph on the mantel. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything. I promise I won't waste what you gave me." That night, she slept in Eleanor's room, wrapped in the same quilts that had kept her warm that first desperate night. And for the first time in her life, Nora felt completely, utterly at peace. She had a home. She had a family in Thomas. She had a purpose. Eleanor's dream had come true. The Eleanor Whitmore Foundation facility officially opened on January 15th, 2000. Nora stood in the renovated entrance hall, watching as the first residents arrived. They came in small groups, some with social workers, some with only garbage bags containing their belongings, all of them carrying that same look Nora recognized from her own mirror, guarded, hopeful, terrified of believing this might actually be real. A girl named Jasmine was first through the door. She was 16, with purple streaks in her black hair and a defensive slouch to her shoulders. She looked around the bright, warm space with obvious suspicion. "This is really for us? Like actually for us?" Nora stepped forward. "Yeah, it's really for you. Welcome home, Jasmine." Jasmine's eyes filled with tears, though she blinked them back quickly. "Nobody's ever said that to me before." "Well, get used to it," Nora said with a smile, "because you're going to hear it a lot here." Over the next several hours, all 30 residents arrived. Nora greeted each one personally, helped them find their rooms, answered questions. Some kids were chatty, already making friends. Others were quiet, withdrawn, needing time to trust that this wasn't another temporary stop. Nora understood both reactions intimately. That evening, Rachel gathered everyone in the common room for a welcome meeting. She explained the rules, reasonable ones, safety-focused rather than controlling, and outlined the support services available. Educational tutors, therapists, career counselors, college prep assistants, everything designed to help these kids build sustainable futures. "This isn't charity," Rachel told them. "This is investment. We believe in you. We believe you have potential that's been buried under trauma and instability. Our job is to help you uncover it. Your job is to show up for yourself every single day. Some days that'll be easy. Some days it'll be the hardest thing you've ever done. But we'll be here either way." Nora watched the faces in the room. Some kids looked skeptical, others looked relieved. A few looked like they might cry. She stood up, her voice shaking slightly. "I know some of you know who I am. I know you've probably heard about the money and the cottage and all that. But what matters is this. I was where you are. Exactly where you are. Abandoned, scared, convinced I didn't matter to anyone. And someone I never met saved my life by believing I was worth saving. Now I get to believe that about you. So, welcome, really. We're glad you're here." The room was silent for a moment. Then a boy in the back started clapping. Others joined in until the whole room erupted in applause. Nora felt her face flush, but she also felt something else. Pride. Not in the money or the foundation itself, but in the possibility of what it represented. Second chances. Hope. Proof that one person's compassion could ripple forward through time. As winter turned to spring of 2000, the foundation grew. Word spread about the Burlington facility, and soon Nora was receiving calls from social workers across New England asking if they could open similar programs in other cities. With Patricia's guidance, they developed a model that could be replicated. By the end of the year, groundbreaking had begun on a second facility in Portland, Maine, and a third in Manchester, New Hampshire. Nora turned 12 in March, celebrated with a small party at the cottage. Maya came, along with a few other friends from school. They ate cake, played games in the snow, and for a few hours, Nora was just a regular kid at a regular birthday party. No media, no lawyers, no foundation business. just laughter and frosting and the kind of simple joy she'd once thought she'd never experience. Thomas gave her a gift that made her cry, a leather-bound journal similar to Eleanor's. "Your story deserves to be written down," he said. "Not for anyone else, but for you, so you never forget where you came from or what you've survived." That night, Nora made her first entry. March 23rd, 2000. I'm 12 years old today. A year ago, I couldn't have imagined being here, being happy, being useful. Eleanor saved me, but now I get to save others. That feels like the best birthday present anyone could ask for. By the summer, Nora had established a routine. School during the year, foundation work during breaks, time at the cottage whenever she needed to reconnect with Eleanor's memory. She'd matured rapidly, forced to grow up faster than most kids her age, but Thomas worked hard to preserve her childhood where he could. Movie nights, camping trips, teaching her to drive on the empty roads of Frosthaven, even though she was years away from legal driving age. The media attention never fully disappeared, but it shifted. Instead of fortune girl, headlines now read teen philanthropist or young humanitarian. Nora gave occasional interviews, always bringing the focus back to the foundation's work rather than her personal story. She appeared on a morning show with Rachel, discussing the foster care crisis and what communities could do to help. "The system is broken," Nora said during one interview. "There aren't enough foster homes, and many kids age out without any support. They end up homeless, incarcerated, or worse. We can do better. We have to do better." The interviewer asked the inevitable question. "What do you say to people who think you're too young to manage this kind of wealth and responsibility?" Nora didn't hesitate. "I'd say they're probably right that I'm young, but age doesn't determine whether you understand suffering. I know what it feels like to be thrown away. That knowledge makes me the perfect person for this job, not the wrong person." The clip went viral. Suddenly, Nora wasn't just a curiosity or a cautionary tale. She was a voice for a generation of forgotten kids. Donations poured into the foundation from people inspired by her story. Other wealthy individuals reached out, offering to fund similar programs. The movement Eleanor had started with a hidden chest was growing beyond anything Nora could have imagined. But success brought new challenges. As the foundation expanded, so did the demands on Nora's time. By 13, she was juggling school, foundation board meetings, site visits to new facilities, and the normal chaos of adolescence. She started to feel stretched thin, exhausted, overwhelmed. One night, she broke down. Thomas found her crying at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers and financial reports. "I can't do this," she sobbed. "It's too much. I don't know what I'm doing." Thomas sat beside her, pulling her into a hug. "Then stop. Take a break. The foundation will survive without you for a while." "But these kids need help now. I can't just walk away." "You're not walking away. You're taking care of yourself so you can help them better later. Nora, you're 13 years old. You should be worried about homework and boys and whether your hair looks okay, not managing a multi-million-dollar nonprofit. Rachel and Patricia and I can handle things for a while. You just focus on being a kid." Nora wiped her eyes. Eleanor didn't take breaks. Eleanor was an adult, Thomas said gently, and she didn't have the weight of public scrutiny or the pressure you're under. She saved quietly, lived simply, and made her impact on her own terms. You're allowed to do the same. This is your foundation, Nora. It moves at your pace, not anyone else's. That conversation marked a turning point. Nora learned to delegate, to trust the adults around her, to say no when she needed to. She stepped back from day-to-day operations and focused on being a strategic advisor rather than trying to control everything. The foundation didn't collapse. In fact, it thrived, proving that her value wasn't in doing everything herself, but in inspiring others to join the mission. By the time Nora turned 14 in 2001, the foundation operated 6 facilities across 4 states, serving nearly 200 young people. Success stories emerged. Kids who'd been considered hopeless cases graduated high school, got into college, found careers they loved. A boy named Marcus, who'd been homeless at 17, earned a full scholarship to MIT. A girl named Keisha, who'd run away from 12 different foster homes, became a published poet. These weren't miracles. They were what happened when you gave kids stability, support, and the belief that they mattered. Nora collected their stories the way Eleanor had collected investments, carefully, reverently, knowing they represented something precious. She kept a wall in her room at the cottage covered with photos of Foundation residents, their faces smiling, their eyes bright with possibility. On hard days, she'd look at that wall and remember why Eleanor's gift mattered. High school brought new challenges and new growth. Nora attended a private academy in Burlington, where she was finally just another student, albeit one with an unusual background. She joined the debate team, discovering she had a talent for persuasive argument honed by years of defending herself in courtrooms and board meetings. She made real friends, kids who knew about her past but cared more about whether she'd help them study for chemistry tests. She also experienced her first crush, a boy named Alex who played guitar and made her laugh. They dated for 6 months before mutually deciding they were better as friends. It was normal, messy, teenage stuff. And Nora loved every minute of it because it was hers, not Eleanor's legacy or the Foundation's mission, just her life unfolding in all its awkward glory. Thomas watched her grow with a mixture of pride and melancholy. "Sometimes I look at you and can't believe you're the same terrified kid I found in the attic," he said one evening. "I'm not," Nora replied. "That kid needed saving. I don't anymore. Now I do the saving. Eleanor would be so proud. I hope so. I think about her every day. Wonder what she'd think of the Foundation, whether we're doing it right, whether she'd approve of the decisions we're making." Thomas smiled. "She left everything to someone she never met, based entirely on faith. I think she'd approve of you trusting your instincts." As Nora approached 15, she began thinking seriously about her future. The trust would transfer to her full control when she turned 25. That gave her 10 years to prepare, to learn, to become the kind of steward Eleanor had been. She started taking business classes, studying non-profit management, learning about investments and estate planning, not because she had to, but because she wanted to be worthy of the gift she'd been given. The cottage remained her sanctuary. She spent every Christmas there, every Eleanor's death anniversary, every moment when the weight of responsibility felt too heavy. The building held memories now, not just Eleanor's, but hers. The kitchen where Thomas taught her to cook, the living room where she'd read hundreds of books, the attic where everything had changed. She'd left the chest in place, empty now, but still meaningful. Sometimes she'd sit beside it and talk to Eleanor like she was still there. "We have 8 facilities now, almost 400 kids. Some of them remind me of you. Quiet, brilliant, overlooked. Others are loud and broken and angry. We help them all, because that's what you would have done." On Nora's 16th birthday in 2003, the Foundation reached a milestone. 1,000 kids served since opening. Rachel organized a celebration at the Burlington facility, inviting current and former residents. The common room overflowed with people, teenagers, young adults, some with families of their own now. They shared stories, laughed, cried, thanked Nora for changing their lives. Marcus, the MIT student, gave a speech. "5 years ago, I was sleeping in my car, convinced I'd never amount to anything. This Foundation didn't just give me a bed and meals. It gave me a future. It gave me proof that someone believed I was worth investing in. That changes everything. So thank you, Nora. And thank you, Eleanor, wherever you are. You saved more lives than you'll ever know." Nora stood in the back of the room, tears streaming down her face, overwhelmed by the realization that Eleanor's dream hadn't just saved her. It had multiplied, cascading forward, touching lives that would touch other lives. The ripple effect was infinite. That night, back at the cottage, Nora wrote in her journal, "March 23rd, 2003. I'm 16 today. 8 years ago, I was nobody, a throwaway kid the system had given up on. Today, I stood in a room full of people who exist in stability and hope because one woman believed in second chances. I don't know if I deserve this life, but I'm grateful for it. and I promise to keep honoring Eleanor's faith, not just in me, but in all of us. The years that followed brought both triumphs and challenges. A facility in Boston faced funding issues until a major donor stepped in. A resident in the Portland house struggled with addiction, requiring intensive support, but eventually achieving recovery. Nora graduated high school with honors and enrolled at Boston University, studying nonprofit management and social work. She commuted from the Cottage, refusing to live in dorms, needing that connection to Eleanor's memory. College was harder than she'd expected. Not academically, she'd always been a strong student, but emotionally. She was surrounded by kids whose biggest concerns were grades and parties, while she carried the weight of a foundation serving hundreds. She felt isolated, different, older than her years, but she pushed through, driven by the same stubbornness that had kept her alive in the snow all those years ago. Thomas aged gracefully, his hair going fully silver, his face lined with years of worry and pride. He'd devoted his life to honoring his aunt's wish, and watching Nora flourish was his greatest reward. "I never had kids of my own," he told her once. "Didn't think I was meant to be a father. But you proved me wrong. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Nora." "You saved me," she replied. "No, I helped you. You saved yourself." As Nora's 21st birthday approached in 2008, she faced a decision. The trust would transfer to her full control in 4 years. She could continue expanding the foundation, or she could shift focus, explore new ways to deploy Eleanor's wealth. Patricia suggested diversification, education scholarships, medical research, housing initiatives. The possibilities were endless. But Nora kept returning to the same truth. Eleanor's gift had saved her because it met her at her point of deepest need. The foundation worked because it did the same for others. Why fix what wasn't broken? She decided to double down. In a meeting with the board, she proposed an ambitious expansion plan, 20 facilities by 2015, serving 2,000 kids annually. It would require significant fundraising beyond Eleanor's initial fortune, but Nora had spent years building credibility, relationships, and a track record of success. The money would come. And it did. Major foundations signed on. Corporate sponsors contributed. Individual donors, many of them former foster youth themselves, gave what they could. By 2010, the foundation operated in 12 states with 15 facilities. Nora had become a recognized leader in child welfare advocacy, testifying before state legislatures, consulting on policy reforms, writing op-eds about the foster care crisis. But she never forgot where she started. Every Christmas Eve, she returned to the cottage in Frosthaven, sat by the fire, and read Eleanor's letters aloud. It was her ritual, her way of staying grounded, of remembering that none of this was about her. It was about the scared, frozen girl who'd needed a miracle. It was about the woman who'd believed miracles were possible. It was about the thousands of kids who would need their own miracles in the years to come. On Christmas Eve 2011, Nora sat in the cottage reading Eleanor's journal entries. She'd read them countless times, but they still moved her. One passage from July of 1976 struck her deeply that night. "I won't live to see whether my plan works. That's the hardest part. Dying without knowing if my faith was justified. But I've realized that's the nature of faith. It's not faith if you get proof. So I'm choosing to believe. I'm choosing to trust that the universe will guide the right person to this cottage, that they'll understand what I'm trying to do, that they'll carry it forward. And maybe, just maybe, they'll remember me not as the lonely teacher who died alone, but as the woman who believed in second chances even when she couldn't see them herself." Nora closed the journal and looked at Eleanor's photograph. "I remember you," she whispered. "Everyone remembers you. You changed the world, Eleanor, and you're still changing it." As Nora approached 25 in 2012, she began preparing for the full transfer of control. Patricia had structured everything meticulously, ensuring a smooth transition. On her 25th birthday, March 23, 2012, the trust dissolved and full ownership of Eleanor's fortune now grown to over 500 million through careful management and investment, transferred to Nora's name. She marked the occasion quietly at the cottage with Thomas and Patricia. They raised glasses of champagne, though Nora barely sipped hers. "To Eleanor," Thomas toasted, "who saw what others couldn't and believed when others wouldn't." "To Eleanor," Nora and Patricia echoed. That night, Nora walked through the cottage alone, touching the walls, the furniture, the banister. She climbed to the attic and sat beside the empty chest. "I got here," she said aloud. 25 years old, just like your plan. The foundation is strong. The kids are thriving. And I'm not the scared little girl anymore. I'm the woman you believed I could become. Thank you for that. Thank you for seeing me before I existed." The years that followed brought the foundation to new heights. By 2015, they'd reached the goal of 20 facilities. By 2018, they'd served over 5,000 young people. Success stories multiplied. Former residents became teachers, doctors, artists, social workers. Some came back to work for the foundation, wanting to give others what they'd received. Nora, now in her 30s, remained deeply involved, but had also built a life beyond the foundation. She married at 31, a man named Daniel, who'd been a high school guidance counselor and understood her mission viscerally. They had a daughter in 2016, naming her Eleanor in honor of the woman who'd started it all. Little Eleanor grew up hearing stories about her namesake, about the cottage in the ghost town, about the Christmas Eve when everything changed. When she was old enough to understand, Nora took her to Frosthaven, showed her the cottage, let her see where the miracle had happened. "Was she magic?" little Eleanor asked, staring at the photograph of Big Eleanor on the mantel. "No," Nora said. "She was just a woman who believed kindness was more powerful than fear, and she was right." By 2025, the Foundation's 30th anniversary, Nora had fulfilled every promise she'd made. Over 10,000 young people had been served. Hundreds had gone on to build successful lives. The model had been replicated by other organizations across the country. The foster care landscape had changed, slowly but measurably, because one woman had hidden a fortune in an attic and one girl had found it. Nora stood at the podium during the anniversary celebration, looking out at a room filled with faces. Former residents, donors, staff, board members, and Thomas, now 83 and using a cane but still sharp as ever. She'd prepared a speech but found herself setting it aside. 30 years ago, I was 10 years old and dying in the snow. I'd been abandoned, forgotten, convinced I didn't matter. Then I found a cottage, and inside it, a woman's faith that someone like me existed and deserved a chance. Eleanor Whitmore saved my life, but she did more than that. She showed me that one person's compassion can echo through generations. Every kid we've helped, they'll help others, and those others will help more. The ripple never ends. She paused, her voice thick with emotion. People ask me all the time what it's like to inherit a fortune. They think it's about the money, the comfort, the security. But that's not what I inherited. I inherited purpose. I inherited the belief that broken things can be mended, that lost people can be found, and that kindness isn't a weakness. It's the strongest force in the world. So thank you, Eleanor, for believing in me before I could believe in myself. And thank you to everyone here who's carried that belief forward. This isn't my foundation. It's ours. And it's Eleanor's. Always. The room erupted in applause. Thomas wiped tears from his eyes. Little Eleanor, now 9, squeezed her mother's hand. And somewhere, in a place beyond words and time, Nora believed Eleanor was smiling. That Christmas Eve, Nora returned to the cottage one more time. She was 41 now, her daughter beside her, Thomas too frail to make the journey. The cottage had been maintained perfectly, preserved as a historical site, but still warm, still welcoming, still home. They sat by the fire, mother and daughter, and Nora told the story one more time. How she'd stumbled through the snow, how she'd found the letters, how everything had changed in a single moment of desperate hope. "Will I be like her someday?" little Eleanor asked. "Like Big Eleanor." Nora pulled her daughter close. "You'll be like yourself. But if you remember what she taught us, that every person matters, that kindness compounds, that faith can move mountains, then yes, you'll carry her forward. We all will. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire crackle, feeling the presence of all the lives that had been touched by this place. The cottage wasn't just a building anymore. It was a symbol, a promise, a testament to what's possible when one person decides that someone else's life is worth saving. As snow began to fall outside, Nora thought about the journey. From that frozen, terrified child to this, a woman who'd built something lasting, something meaningful, something that would outlive her, just as it had outlived Eleanor. She'd taken a gift given in faith and multiplied it beyond measure. And that, she realized, was the true inheritance. Not the money, not the foundation, not even the cottage. The inheritance was the belief that we're all worth saving, all capable of changing the world, all deserving of second chances. Eleanor Whitmore had believed it. Nora Bennett had proved it. And thousands of kids who'd walked through foundation doors had lived it. The snow fell heavier now, blanketing Frosthaven in fresh white, covering the abandoned buildings and empty streets. But the cottage glowed warm, its windows bright against the darkness, a lighthouse for any lost soul who might need it. Because some gifts never stop giving, some acts of faith never stop rippling forward, and some frozen Christmas Eves become the moment everything changes forever. Anyone can change a life if they're brave enough to believe that lost things deserve to be found and broken hearts deserve to mend. As dawn broke over Frosthaven on that Christmas morning, Nora Bennett stood on the porch of the cottage that had saved her life, her daughter asleep inside, and watched the sun paint the snow gold. She'd been given a miracle 33 years ago, and she'd spent every day since trying to pass that miracle forward. The scared, abandoned girl had become the woman who made sure no child ever had to freeze alone in the dark. Because Eleanor Whitmore had believed in second chances, and Nora Bennett had made them real. The end. Up next, 2 more incredible true stories that will move you. Click now to continue the journey with us, and don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe every child deserves someone who won't give up on them.